In last week's episode, we talked about ad blockers. Let's see what you had to say. Ranak Lindor hits on a really important part of this conversation, and I think a really important sort of idea in the larger conversation about making ads, marketing, and PR, which is, the degree to which any ad can itself be entertaining and how effective that entertainment is, and when an ad isn't entertaining or when it just completely ignores or eschews the idea that it might be, how ineffective it becomes. And I think, like the television, on the television advert side, the stereotype is that, right, American ads are loud and flashy and brash, and they're just like in your face and, want you to buy the thing. But then English ads are entertaining and funny and sometimes contain stories. And, the first place that I always go to is like John Lewis advertisements, which are so good, and we have nothing like that in the United States. And I think, extending that to internet ads, yeah, they're all that kind of brash, loud, just trying to get your attention, just trying to get you to look even for a second at the thing so that you are reminded of the existence of the product it's trying to sell. And, I would guess that is effective and easy. And I think that's the big part of it, right? That making an ad that is entertaining and earnest and draws people in earnestly is just really, really hard. And so it doesn't happen as often, but I would guess it's also probably a lot more effective. But, again, I'm not sure, but it certainly feels like it is. iNezumi, Ryu, and a bunch of other people point out that while it might be useful to talk about the ethics of ad blocking, there is a complementary conversation to be had about the ethics of ads. And, when we're talking about things that autoplay and flash and make a lot of noise and track you and do all of these other things that are just sort of like make you feel a little uncomfortable or give you the jiblies or are just plain irritating, you are incentivizing people, sort of like how we talked about it in the episode, to block those ads. And so, there's this whole set of things that come together to create what might be an ethical ad. And I think, hey, I'm gonna put it in the notebook for a future Idea Channel episode. I think it's a great idea. GelidGanef writes a really great comment about engagement as it relates to advertising and how a lot of companies seem to have figured this out on television, that if you make an ad entertaining and earnest and engaging in all these ways, people are not only likely to tolerate it, but are then likely to engage with it, to talk about it with their friends. Like we'll be hanging out with friends and we'll talk about how good the Apple Watch commercials are and be kind of like upset about how much we like them. But this strategy doesn't seem to have transported over to online advertising. And this made me think, like, has there ever been a case where I have seen an online ad, like either a YouTube pre-roll or anything, where I was like, man, I was entertained by that. They did a good job. And then I later went and talked about it with friends, and I don't think that has ever happened. And I wonder if, am I alone here? Has that happened to you? I would love to know. All Hail the Mighty Glow Cloud points out another aspect of this thinking of ads as work frame, which is the kind of inherent subjugation, or I don't know if that's the right word, almost like hierarchy that it perpetrates, which is, you're handed this thing from down on high, from your boss, so to speak, that you then must deal with or labor on. And I think that this is a great point. I think that this is one of the ways in which you can say that, like, cultural hegemony is maintained or perpetrated, but then it also has the effect that All Hail the Mighty Glow Cloud talks about, which is that you can then sort of protest against it, that it might have the opposite effect, that because you are forced to watch all of these specific commercials, you then might be like, well, I'm sick of this thing, and I will consciously decide to not purchase it, to not engage with it. And yeah, I think this is a great point. Pikirion Mallea talks about how television advertising is not as obtrusive as internet advertising, and so that makes them sort of fundamentally different advertising entities. And I think that is absolutely true, but I also think that we're kind of used to the way that television ads are obtrusive, and that we've sort of accepted it, we've gotten used to it, because, I think that they really are deeply kind of obnoxious, and that they have their own techniques for accomplishing the same things that internet ads do. They can be really loud, they can be really flashy, they can sort of disrupt context in a really jarring way. And I think really what it is that ads will only ever be as obtrusive as their medium allows, and it just so happens, right? I mean, internet advertising, the internet allows ads to be obtrusive in a really specific and pervasive way, and that's not as true on television, and there's also regulation related to how one can and is able to advertise on TV. So, I think that's another big part of it, like, what is the legal sort of background or framing for all of this stuff? But yeah, definitely an important part of this. Virginia Smith talks about how all of this relates to basically paid product reviewing or paid product placement. And I think, there's a whole other part of this conversation that's really huge and super complicated, which is native advertising, which is, what are the best ways to create an ad that looks like content that still accomplishes all the things that an ad does, but then the audience knows that it's an ad, but still wants to engage with it as though it is content. And it's just, man, I would summarize the whole thing up by saying that it's a mess. It's just a mess. Jay Kuriyami and a bunch of other people talk about Patreon as an important part of all of this, and I totally agree. I think Patreon is great, and I think that it provides a sort of like hope for the kinds of things that we're talking about here, which is being able to consume media that we love in such a way that people are fairly compensated for it, and we don't have to consume ads or additional content that we're not interested in or that we find, offensive or, obnoxious. And I think that you can see some of what Patreon is going for in things like PBS broadcast or American Public Media or NPR, like these publicly funded broadcasters and distributors that have figured out that they can go to the people who like their things for a huge portion of their support. But man, I don't know, call me cynical. I think that it's going to be quite a while, if ever, that something like Patreon would create an ad-free ecosystem of any kind. I just think that ad-funded media is such an inextricable part of the way that media operates, and even the way that we think about it, that we're just always going to be stuck with it. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, is there a potential for a future that is ad-free? I don't think so. I just don't think so. But also get off my lawn, maybe? I don't know.